by not being involved right in the beginning, we allowed corruption to happen. We allowed policies to be put in and things to fly under the radar. We thought that just voting once every 4 years or 5 years would solve all the problems, but unfortunately it doesn't.
How can we as ordinary citizens mobilize against hostile government action? Well, somebody who knows plenty about this is Rob Hutchinson. He is the chairman and the founder of DearSA South Africa. Rob Hutchinson, welcome to Solutions with David Ansara.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start off with why you started DearSA and what does DearSA do?
It's quite an interesting story, to tell you the truth. It started back in the ETOL days when we were fighting ETOLs. At the time, I was part of DearSA, and the whole argument against ETOLs was there was a lack of public participation in the decision-making process. And that brought out a lot of flaws in the system and also created a lot of opportunities. I think in that case, only 25 people responded to an advert that was placed in national or local newspapers, and government went ahead and ticked the box and said, yes, we consulted with the public, and therefore adequate public participation had taken place, which of course it hadn't. To this day, we still don't know who responded, who those 25 respondents were, or what the content of their submissions were. So when I left DearSA, which was about four or 5 years ago, then I saw an opportunity to create an organization that does facilitate public participation in an open and transparent manner. And that's pretty much what we do. We scan the government gazettes, we go through other notices, and we rely on the public to inform us of things that we might have missed. And then we build a campaign around that. We don't run petitions as such, which most organizations do. Our process makes sure that every person who does make a comment has their voice represented in a legal format as an individual submission on whatever the call for comment may be. And that's generally in response to policy amendments, proposals, and so on. So we do reports on public participation, which we send through to Parliament, as well as each individual comment, and keep the whole process absolutely transparent, so government can't turn around and say, well, we only had 25 respondents on this. When all agreed, we actually hold the data and can challenge government at a later stage should the need be required.
This process is distinct from a petition where you might just be gathering names. Here with DearSA's method, you as an individual citizen are actually empowered to make your own submission through the DearSA platform. Is that an accurate reflection?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah. So it's, as I said, it's not a petition because, in a petition, everybody's agreeing to the mandate of that petition, and therefore government, even if a petition has over 1 million signatures, government will treat it as a single submission because everyone has agreed to the mandate as set out there. Whereas ours, each comment that people make is presented as an individual submission, which under the constitutional law, government has to acknowledge and consider in the final decision-making process. So it's become quite a powerful tool as far as educating the public about changes in the governmental process and the legislative process, as well as creating quite an impact in policy formation. Government now has to go through thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of comments to actually formulate correct policy. And it's great now, because before government would just go ahead, there'd be a very one-sided process, but now we've actually generated enough power to influence, where the public has the opportunity to influence policy before it's implemented.
And could you give us some examples of recent campaigns that DearSA has run and how effective were they?
Sure, we've run, I'd say, approaching 300 campaigns to date over the past 4 years, completed 300 campaigns. Some of the big ones, we had quite a significant participation in the NHI, the land expropriation process. I think in the land expropriation process, we sent about, I think there were 4 separate campaigns there. We sent over 500,000 individual comments through to government throughout those various processes, and that created quite a significant impact there. It's just the can has just been kicked down the road, and as we know, government recently, the committee voted, and they voted against amending the constitution. So, yeah, other campaigns, recent ones are COVID health regulations. We've had a fantastic uptake in participation, over 305,000 comments on amending the Health Act and adopting regulations. And we're pretty active throughout the COVID period on addressing regulations as the minister publishes them. In some cases, the minister allowed 48 hours for comments. Didn't make a difference for us. We still managed to send about 12,000 during one of those processes. And it has created quite a significant impact where we've had regulations withdrawn or amended and so on. And I think one we did with the IRR recently was the amendments to the Electoral Act, the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. And the IRR picked up a publication or a notice published in one newspaper, and there was nothing published in the Government Gazette. So the first thing it did was request an extension, which was granted. And then in 1 week, we managed to send through just under 13,000 individual comments to government, all raising concerns around a new form of voting. And the assumption was electronic voting was going to be introduced. And the result of that was the policy was amended, and they withdrew that clause. So again, it's quite powerful in influencing policy before it gets pushed through, and that avoids expensive court cases or lengthy processes after the fact.
Yeah, and I think the EWC example is a good one, because here was this hostile policy that was put on the table that was going to undermine property rights and severely damage the economy and also people's personal freedom to own what they own. And I think that was a good example of a multi-pronged strategy, because in addition to the usual letters to the editor and op-eds and public campaigns, it's also saying, well, actually, we need you on our side to kind of push back against this. And yeah, eventually, as you said, that ad hoc committee, their proposal to amend Section 25, that was ultimately voted down. And I think that kind of pincer maneuver of pressure, I think really helped a lot. And the Electoral Amendment Bill as well, I think that was a very good example of a successful, speedy resolution to what would also be quite a damaging policy. So, I mean, I think it's easy to get despondent in South Africa about the myriad bad laws. I think we have a department of bad laws that is working very actively. It's the most productive department in the government. But I think it also shows that, there's this theory of balance of forces, that the ANC government will advance a certain policy agenda until they reach resistance. And so that's why it's very important to have that resistance there to absorb that advancement.
Exactly.
So
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I think the difference is that we provide the participant an opportunity to either agree, disagree, or we call it not fully agree or disagree. So they have 3 options, and you can easily see which way the policy goes, and if the public are upset about it, because we offer that choice. And we acknowledge that people will support some policies and be against other policies. And I think that's that raises quite an interesting a point or source of information there. It's because we can go into the insights and figure out, why do people support bad policy? And is it a case of misunderstanding or not realizing the consequences thereof? And then we can address it from that issue. And the same goes for good policy. Government does once in a while, once in a blue moon, put out some good policy, and that the same would apply there. Why are people supporting it, or why are people not supporting it? And that does offer a different angle to petitions as such. Yeah.
So, Rob, I was watching some football the other day, and I saw stadia in Europe filled with unmasked people. But then when I go to Woolworths on a Saturday morning to do my shopping, I'm still required to wear a mask. And it seems that there's this kind of lingering long tail to many of the COVID regulations. And I'd like to speak about DearSA's role during the lockdown. I think initially there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, obviously, that motivated a very strong response from the government. But as we learned more about the virus and its pattern of behavior, and as the virus became more endemic, it seemed that a lot of the initial strong reaction was maybe unwarranted. But the kind of poorly judged regulations still persisted. What was DearSA's role during the lockdown? And then we can maybe speak about how the regulations are evolving and what role you continue to play.
Look, I think COVID provided fantastic opportunities for all civil society organizations, in that we all suddenly became extremely aware of governmental processes as public or as citizens. Before, people weren't quite involved in the process. They didn't quite understand how laws and regulations are promulgated. But during COVID, everyone was granted an opportunity to view the insights of policy formation. And we seized that opportunity as a public participation organization when the minister put out new regulations under the Disaster Management Act. We had to question some of them: open-toed shoot, warm dinners, ban on e-commerce, certain restrictions on exercise windows, and many more, closing of schools, and so on. So we ran several campaigns throughout COVID, and we're still, some of which are still running, all in response to regulations and irregularities amongst those. We were quite successful in influencing and the withdrawal of regulations. One was e-commerce. We could not understand why that was banned. So we challenged the minister at the time, and that was withdrawn. It's great. We sometimes we don't get the credit or even seek to get credit on what we do. We just want to see it get done. So a lot of other parties jumped on the bandwagon, including political parties, and saying, we did this, and we don't mind. We know. We wrote letters to the minister, showed the public participation, and gave set a deadline to respond or withdraw by a certain date, which is exactly what the minister did on 3 separate occasions. And because of that, we decided to focus heavily on COVID regulations, the Health Act, Disaster Management Act, and everything else related to unwarranted lockdowns, but with an open eye, rather than oppose everything that comes out. We wanted to hear the public's view on these matters, and then we acted legally through the courts based on the feedback from the public. So we didn't act and represent ourselves. We represented all participants in South Africa, South African citizens in general. And yeah, it's been an absolutely great time. Well, I wouldn't say great time during COVID, but it's been an interesting time, without a doubt. We've definitely grown as an organization. The public, and one of our main functions as an organization is to educate the public to the importance of getting involved in democracy at a day-to-day level, not just at elections. And COVID certainly did provide that opportunity and that awakening. So yeah, it's been a good time during COVID for us. I go back to saying it's a good time, but it has worked well. The fight is still on with the shift of the regulations once housed under the Temporary Disaster Management Act. They are now being moved to be permanent under the National Health Act. And that is a major concern for us, because even the regulations that were once set aside, like isolation measures and forced quarantine and so on, have crept back. They're back into the proposed regulations for the Health Act. And if they are accepted, they will become permanent under the Health Act, because it is, of course, a permanent piece of legislation. Whereas the Disaster Management Act, although set aside now for COVID purposes, the regulations seem to be still in place. And that's also created confusion as to what's actually going on in Parliament. So when the Disaster Management Act was withdrawn by the President, they had in place what they call temporary regulations or interim regulations, and those mask wearing and social distancing and venue capacities were still in place. Those temporary regulations were only supposed to be there for, I think they actually called them limited regulations, were only supposed to be there for 30 days in a cool down period. However, those regulations in particular have now been adopted to be permanent under the Health Act. And that was without any public consultation or review process or comments from the public. In the meantime, they've put a set of draft regulations together, which were what were once housed under the Disaster Management Act. And the intention with those is to move them to be permanent under the Health Act. And those are the ones that are currently open for public comment. Our main thought is that they will slowly move certain regulations one at a time or a handful at a time to be permanent, as they did with those limited regulations, and which makes the whole public participation process on those draft regulations kind of pointless. But nonetheless, that's why we have taken the minister to court on the regulations, on the limited regulations, and the draft regulations, and we'll be in court on the 26th to the 28th of July, challenging all of that. If successful, I'm always hesitant to say when successful, but if successful, we should be set a precedent there, and perhaps a global precedent as well, as to how to challenge a government that definitely seems to be overreaching as far as regulations and limiting regulations goes.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to check that excessive state power, Rob. So you mentioned litigation. I mean, how does litigation form part of your strategy? So it's not just that you're making submissions to Parliament or whichever government department, you're actively taking on bad policies as well in the courts. Yes. How successful have you been in the legal arena, and what is your approach?
Our approach is pretty simple. We act in favor of the participants, and if the public participation process has been flouted or ignored, then we have an obligation to challenge it in its entirety. And the objective there is to either restart the public participation process or have it set aside and declare it as unconstitutional. And we've been very successful in our court cases so far. The first lot was getting the certain regulations right in the beginning. I think it was in 2020, having certain regulations withdrawn. That worked out very well. And we've challenged many other pieces of legislation that we seem, that the public informs us or participants inform us to be incorrect. So if government goes ahead and implements something where the public have wholly objected to it, then we will act in favor of the participants and have that addressed in court. And most of the time, government retracts. They announce that they're going to challenge our application, but then they retract at a later stage once presented with the evidence of public participation. It's an incredibly powerful motivator, and obviously government is afraid of backlash from the public or from us or from other organizations that we collaborate with.
So, Rob, I think something that I've really admired about DearSA is the way that you've used technology to highlight these issues, to facilitate public participation. And a lot of people are quite pessimistic about the disruptive role of technology in terms of the impact that it's had on democracy. You see lots of hand-wringing op-eds about misinformation and things like that. But, I think that there's a huge positive upside to the internet and the way that it's been able to highlight and disseminate the dangers of these bad policies and also mobilize people. How do you go about using technology in terms of marketing and disseminating your campaigns?
Oh, well, technology is at the forefront of everything we do. The platform is an online platform, and it operates by user input. So it's been an absolute wonderful opportunity to first of all inform people, and we use social media extensively for that, and of course an email database which we have gathered from each campaign. Every time someone does participate, they are added to the communication database, where of course they can unsubscribe at any time they want, but we use it to inform people, keep them updated, keep them in the loop as to what's coming up, presenting new information, and so on. Our database sits at about 1.4 million subscribers currently, and it's grown at an absolute rapid rate. Social media has also been absolutely wonderful. We have a fantastic Telegram group with about just under 10,000 subscribers in that. And that is instant communication. It works really, really well. We use that to put out news articles, some from us, some from other organizations, a lot from the media, but all relevant to policy and perhaps the campaigns that we're running currently. Our Facebook page is approaching 200,000 members right now, and also the same strategy as the Telegram group, and then of course Twitter and everything else. But the main technology is obviously in the participation platform itself, and that has really made it really incredibly simple for anyone, no matter who you are, to have your say. It can be mobile based. It's built for mobile. And as I think about 90% of our participants do participate through their mobile, and it's really simple. It takes you not more than 2.5 minutes to have your say, have your voice represented in Parliament on a policy, and of course it's given us great insights as to the public sentiment, and certain demographics and certain groups, and even geolocation does influence people's understanding around policy, which gives us an opportunity to clarify issues or to distribute correct information. There's a lot of misinformation that does go around, as we know, and the sources can sometimes be rather interesting. We've seen misinformation coming from government even, and do chop and change, or different departments in government have totally different interpretations of certain laws and amendments, which is quite concerning. But it's been great. The one problem we do face is that because it's online, it does limit access to those who have who don't have internet access or a smartphone as such. But we do have plans and a working relationship with certain provincial legislatures and with National Assembly to address those issues. So we're working a lot lately with the new parliamentary constituency officers, and we actually are currently doing a public participation education program to get people more involved. And then hopefully Parliament will realize the need for a zero-rated portal so it doesn't use data and so on, which is already in discussion. So Parliament might sponsor it or convince a service provider to provide the data-free portal, which will dramatically change things and allow anyone to have their say.
I suppose one of the risks would be that you're overly dependent on these social media platforms like Facebook, for example. If they don't like a particular tone or emphasis of your campaign, they could perhaps shadow ban it or deplatform it. Do you think that that's a risk for DearSA's ambitions?
It is something we have considered, which is why we've been focusing on developing Telegram and growing our main form of communication, which is the email database. Alongside that, as we expand into markets that might not have access to email, then we gather phone numbers. We can send out an SMS or a WhatsApp to get those people engaged and keep them engaged. I don't think Facebook, have only banned one of our campaigns, and that was something to do with the Firearms Control Act. Obviously, Facebook does not like to promote anything that's to do with firearms, and actually said that they banned it because it appears we're selling firearms, which is clearly not the case. Yeah, but other than that, because we don't present petitions, we actually allow people to have their say whether for or against. I think Facebook treats it slightly different to what we do to other petitions, and well, we've been quite lucky with leniency on Facebook distribution, and it has worked well for us.
So, Rob, what do you make of the state of democracy in South Africa today? Because, on the one hand, a lot of our democratic institutions have taken enormous strain. If you just think of the last few years, for example, the National Prosecuting Authority has been riven by corruption, particularly under the Zuma years. Our state-owned enterprises have been abused, many of the checks and balances, the public protector, these don't really seem to be working in the way that was envisioned. But on the other hand, we have organizations like DearSA, which reflect a kind of vibrancy of civil society. And, a lot of particularly left-wing commentators are often very proud of saying, we have a very robust civil society. But actually, if you look during the lockdown, a lot of the left-wing civil society groups were a bit absent, actually, in kind of standing up for citizen rights. Whereas, groups like AfriForum were also, very vocal and very active, and DearSA too. So, what is your kind of measure of the state of democracy in South Africa? Where are we doing well and where are we not doing so well?
I think if you had asked me that question, say 2 years ago, I would have said we're in a dismal state of democracy. We're leaning towards trusting government far too much and letting them get away with things without question. However, COVID certainly changed that. We became more aware of government overreach, and government kind of shot themselves in the foot with ridiculous regulations and so on. And I think we've seen a definite strong push towards true democracy, especially from the ground up, not so much from the top down. From the top down, it's definitely more of an authoritarian push, with more regulations, more restrictions, taking the erosion of people's rights and so on. And it's a slow process of erosion from the top. And not many people are aware of it because it's a slow process, obviously, and they're willing to sacrifice their rights for the greater good or for the good of others, which never works out, absolutely never works out. Government will always take advantage of the greater good, or as I should say, their favorite term is in the public interest. So government can, I think they feel that they can override certain regulations or clauses in the Constitution if it's in the public interest. And that's a very loose term. Yeah, it's always in the government's interest, in fact. That's very good. But the public in the public interest is such a broad term. It really has no legal standing anywhere, because you simply cannot prove what is in the public interest without asking each and every individual South African if it is in their interest, which government definitely does not do. So, yeah, I think our democracy seems to be strengthening from the bottom up, but weakening from the top down, which is going to create a very interesting situation when the two ends meet. And I think we're approaching that point right now, where the two ends meet. We're seeing significant pushback on all our campaigns to absolutely anything the government proposes, which is maybe not a good thing. And you noted left wing and right wing there, and I can say that because we have a left wing government, there's no doubt we have a more active right wing civil society. It just stands to reason. If we had a right wing government, we'd have a more active left wing civil society, and that's reflected in each of our campaigns. It definitely, most of our campaigns tend to take a right-wing stance. That's simply because the people who lean to the right are more vocal, more active, and in speaking out against the government, and we've provided them with a platform to do so. We also engage. We open up each campaign to any organization that wants to collaborate, no matter which side of the fence they stand on. And we hardly ever get any response from left-leaning organizations. It's generally the right-wing organizations that want to collaborate and put up their comment and their opinion. So hopefully we'll see a shift in a balance to provide proper democracy, or at least from our platform from up. But we expect pushback from the government and the various sections within, or factions within, the ANC to drive their agenda. And of course, we can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about the IRR, is they've been neither left wing nor right wing, but kind of, I don't know, centrist, not quite the term, but the classical liberal center. Why do you think the left wing organizations have been a bit muted during this time, Rob?
I think it's definitely the unwillingness to go against anything government says, put it that way. There could also be their sources of funding. Most organizations are bound to grants and the terms and conditions that the grantee does stipulate. And I mean, we can talk about that for days as to who funds most of these organizations, but I think it's definitely to do with that. You can't go against you don't bite the hand that feeds you at the end of the day. And that makes a lot of left-wing organizations hesitant to step up or speak out or anything, which is crazy because they should be participating. Even if they are in favor of something, they should still have their say and push out the questions that arise. Perhaps it's because if you're not opposing something in the left-wing eye, then you are the enemy. If you don't agree with them, then they are the enemy. And the mere fact that our platform offers an opportunity for both sides to present their views, we don't necessarily agree with any views that go forward. But if the majority of participants are opposed to a left-wing view, then the left-wing organizations will simply avoid it. They won't engage at all. It's quite sad, really. They should do it.
And it wasn't always the case. I mean, if you think of the TAC, no. I mean, they played a really critical role in activating the government to roll out antiretrovirals, and it was a very important human rights achievement, I think. But you mentioned funding, Rob, and I mean, how does DearSA fund its myriad activities? Because it must get quite pricey after a while. I mean, I think of
Yes, it does.
1.5 million or so on your email subscription list. If I look at MailChimp and MailerLite, that's probably costing you a pretty penny.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've developed a lot of in-house systems to avoid those costs. If we worked it out, if we had to use MailChimp to distribute our newsletter, say once a week, it would cost us R250,000 a month to send it out. So it's absolutely ridiculous. So we had to develop our own in-house systems that do it, mostly working through Amazon, AWS systems. And we were awarded a grant from Amazon themselves of $20,000 in Amazon credits, which has helped considerably. We built a whole framework around the whole environment, and obviously the email sending service is fantastic. So we operate through quite a few grants. We've just been awarded a grant from the African Union to expand into all African Union member states. So there will soon be a Dear Kenya and Dear Tanzania and so on. Pretty much doing exactly what Dear South Africa does, but dealing with local governments and so on. And then there's also plans to, in fact, we've already started the process to launch a global platform, deargov.org, and that will again be dealing with issues around the globe and interacting with local governments as the needs may be. We then also receive a fair amount of donations from participants, most of which are once-off donations. But we do have an initiative in place that secures monthly donations through debit order from the public, and it's been quite effective, I must say, simply because I think we don't fight government as such, but if we are compelled to, then we will challenge them. So when applying for a grant, we present ourselves as what we really are, and that is we're an organization that helps government be a better government, rather than an organization that challenges government at every opportunity.
So Rob, earlier you mentioned this distinction between top down and bottom up. And on this show, I've been quite a strong advocate for political decentralization and ordinary individuals taking it upon themselves to solve some of these more intractable social and political problems. What do you think is the importance of citizens getting involved in the participatory democratic process? And, it can be maybe a bit dispiriting when you look around and you see all of the things going wrong in South Africa. But there is a lot of power that people have as individuals, and coordinating their actions can achieve pretty incredible results, as we've shown in this conversation. So how can people get involved? What can they do to achieve a better South Africa?
It's definitely, as you say, David, it's getting involved in the day-to-day bits of democracy, and democracy is hard work. Let's not kid ourselves. To maintain a healthy democracy, you have to be involved in the decision-making process, without a doubt. We all too often, I think we made the mistake right in the beginning of our new democracy, as to, it's a rainbow nation, we can just sit back and let the new government do their thing. And at the end of the day, we were fools to think that nothing would go wrong. Our government and officials are only human, and we fall prey to immense power, no matter who you are. But it does definitely affect you. So by not being involved right in the beginning, we allowed corruption to happen. We allowed policies to be put in and things to fly under the radar. We thought that just voting once every 4 years or 5 years would solve all the problems, but unfortunately it doesn't. Being involved in the decision, and especially on policy formation, is what is required on a daily basis. The issue there is that not many people understand the intricacies of a legal document, of which an amendment to policy is, and government relies on that. So we try and summarize it, break it down into layman's terms, collaborate with organizations such as yourselves and the IRR or any organization to present a user-friendly version of policy and highlight the dangers, the threats, and the good points of that policy. And then, of course, allow people to have their say. And I must say, David, it has actually created a shift in the balance of power. All we've really done is we've shifted the power back to the people where it should be in a democracy, and we challenging the elected officials who are meant to represent their constituencies, but clearly have not been doing so. So now we hold them accountable, and I think we've changed quite a bit of the workings inside Parliament at the various levels now, where they've understood that the public being involved to such a great extent on policy formation and public participation can be a threat to a government that wants to introduce overbearing or overreaching legislation. The public have definitely become more aware of it, and the pushback or providing input has definitely grown, and that's one wonderful thing to see is that shift of power back to the people. The last bastion of democracy is probably public participation.
Well, Rob Hutchinson, I think that democracy is not just a set of laws or institutions, it's also a culture and a mindset. And I think DearSA really represents that approach and that attitude. So I wanted to wish you all the very best with your work, strength to your arm, and we hope that you can continue to make the massive contribution to South Africa's democracy into the future.
Thanks, David. We plan to be here for a long time. It's not just, yes, it was perhaps my idea brought on about by other things, but it's certainly a lot bigger than just me or just DearSA or anything else. To see an effective change in the government, the change that we want to see, requires collaboration, especially among civil society groups and individuals and organizations. Without collaboration and a common goal or a common interest, we are doomed. But we've definitely seen that, and we'll continue to push that. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd be keen to hear your feedback on the show. What do you enjoy about it? Where can I improve? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, do remember to subscribe on audio as well. We're active on all of the major podcast platforms. My name is David Ansara. This is the Solutions Podcast. Until next time, take care.